Let's see a few lines from the Colle openings which we haven't seen in the past. So after e3 and knight f6, bishop d3. So this is the setup they're playing with. We know we have to play c5. And two options here. So we're going to go through c3. We've seen it in the past. The variation we need to look at is after queen c7, knight f3, knight c6. Castle, bishop g4. h3 attacking the bishop, you just go back. And now we're going to look at g4. We've never seen it before. What to do? Okay, move the bishop away. And now, two options. One of them is, what happens if they take you immediately? This is wrong. Black already has an advantage. You take back, you got an attack on this pawn. Meaning that if white plays knight d2, right? You just play rook h3. So normal developing moves don't work. King g2 to defend that pawn. e5. And we're already going all in with e4. And this king is going to be in some trouble. If they take, take. If they take, take. So for instance, let's say if, okay, knight d2, right? To support the knight. Castle. And now a move like b4, which seems to be completely reasonable, you know, take, take, but then the bishop is coming in and the rook is, you know, threatening the queen and so on. This is the usual move. Obviously, they want to destroy our queen side since that's where we castle our king. It's simply met with knight e4. We're going to leave the line here. This is too bad. We're attacking this pawn. And it's not like the pawn can be defended, but, you know, knight c3 would be a terrible threat. Let's say queen c2 seems to be making sense. Putting double attack on this strong knight. But then you just take in f3. Take back and now f5. Position evaluated almost -3. And, you know, there's nothing to do. Even rook h1, playing the only moves like to try and simplify this initiative. Take, take. And after bishop to d6, you might argue white can simplify. And now there's a, you know, but white plays bishop d2. Bishop b2, the rook is attacking on that square. The knight is protecting this. What's going on? Queen to d7. It's just unstoppable. The attack on g4. So just a few moves ago, instead of b4, right? What if the white player reduces the initiative? Knight takes knight. Okay, take back. Knight f3. But now it's just too late. Queen e4. That's it. The game is over. Because you're threatening knight takes pawn. And there's a checkmate coming, basically. This is now unstoppable. What to do? If, I don't know, rook to h1. You just take in g4. Sacrifice. Pawn takes and queen takes back check. You're going to pick up the rook and you take it from there. If instead of rook h1, what about rook g1? With the idea of putting the king somewhere safer. However, you play knight to d7. The simple idea of playing knight to e5. Putting more pressure on this knight and keep building the pressure. King to f1, running away doesn't work, obviously, because you play bishop to e7, finishing development, and this pawn you're gonna just, you know, if the pawn pushes, you're attacking it multiple times. If the rook goes to g3, you just play bishop to d6. The rook now has to move. You're going to h3, then developing the rook, the other rook, and I don't know, position evaluated -6 or something like that at this point. I forgot. So back in this position. Instead of bishop taking bishop, which allows our rook to be too strong, what about knight to h4? The move we were all thinking about. The knight swapping for our bishop. Fine, now we have to take the bishop f from our opponent. That's a strong bishop, the light square bishop. So queen takes back, and now the key move is g5. The knight will have to retreat, then we're going to have access to you know, beginning the attack on the king side. Knight to f5 seems to be in a very good square. What's happening? Well, before that, let's go through knight f3, right? Puts attack on this pawn. Seems interesting. h5. And now we take, and then we're going to have an open, you know, file and diagonals. Knight takes g5 is not a free pawn because bishop h6, where development is over. No way to stop this. Let's say if, for instance, e4, allowing the defense on the knight, you simply take, and now knight takes in e4. It's a completely winning position. The bishop will have to move again, and then you open the lines. So it depends on what white does, but you're completely winning here, as you can tell. Back in this position, instead of e4 to protect that, what about f4? Seems to be making perfect sense. However, take. Pawn takes back. And now queen g3 will end the game very shortly. So back in this position, instead of knight back to f3, what about knight to f5? Looks like a good position. Fine, h5. And again, we are winning here. Knight a3, developing, trying to go to b5. Ignore it, just take this pawn. And after knight to b5, attacking the queen. Queen back to d7, simple as that. Pawn takes back finally, but now a6, kick the knight away. The knight has to go to a3. And now e6, kick the knight away. The knight has to go to g3. And now you finally recapture the pawn in g4. This position is just completely winning. A move like f3 seems to be trapping the knight. Well, not really trapping, but at least reducing the initiative. But now you play queen to c7. The attack is too strong on the knight. This cannot really be defended. A move like f4 will go on to nullify the very attack on the knight. And now this knight is planted there to stay. After castle, the position is evaluated minus 550. You can tell why. So in this position, instead of f3, what about e4? Allowing the development of the bishop, getting the pieces out. You play f5, you just ignore it. That means now the pawn, by the way, cannot take the pawn in d5 to open the files, considering our king is weak. Maybe rook e1 later on. Simply because if pawn takes, let's say, queen h7, right? Game over. Unstoppable. So instead of that, what about rook e1, giving some luft to the king? Queen h7 is coming anyway. That was going to happen anyway. King f1, knight h2 check, king e2. And now you take this pawn with the f pawn with the attack on the queen. The queen will have to move. Queen e3. It's a disaster. Now you take this one. This one takes back. Now knight to g4 attacks the queen. Queen will have to move. Let's say queen to g5. What's going on here? Check. King f1 once again. And now queen check. And goodbye, dreams of glory. One more line we need to see that we haven't explored in the past is, so after bishop d3 here and you play c5, what about b3? I've encountered this move recently. White means to put the bishop in fianchetto. So knight c6, bishop b2. Okay, now you take this one. They have to take with the pawn, otherwise obviously it's a favorable exchange. Bishop g4 straight away attacking the queen. Knight f3 developing. That was going to happen anyway. Queen to a5 check. Okay, what's going on here? If it gets blocked by the knight, it seems completely logical. Knight to b4. And now here's the threat. You're attacking this bishop. Let's make an example. If h3 attacking this bishop, first you take this one with check, double up and isolate the pawns. It's just there's no reason for white to play like that. If instead now white plays castle, seems logical, but this is actually wrong, because he will simply play this bishop, knight takes the bishop, and basically that's it. We've explained that. So what about bishop e2? Best move according to the engine, the only move in such position. You take this knight. This knight now cannot take in f3 because knight c2 will be a discover check. And the king, they move and then you take the rook, you win the exchange. White loses the right to castle, and so let's leave it there. So white will have to take with the bishop. Okay, queen back to c7, the threat remains. Knight c2 check wins the exchange. So what if our opponent will do two options now, which is either c4, thematic move actually in this type of game, or castle. c4 is wrong because knight d3 check. Don't forget about this. King moves. You take this one, but now queen to c2 apparently traps the knight. You're gonna take this pawn now. Desperate move. Pawn takes back. And now g6 developed from the fianchetto. The pawn is pinned, so you can't really take. Rook to c1, I'm pinning and ready to win material. Bishop to h6, pinning the knight. We're gonna leave the line here. It's game over. I mean, position is just considerably better for black. Even if they take this pawn, looks dangerous. But now queen a5, double attack on the knight. Knight to c4, attacking the queen, you just pin it. And there's still an attack on the rook, so the rook will have to move. There's nothing here. If instead of knight c4, what about knight to be here in this position? Instead of that knight c4, what about knight b3, attacking the queen? Same thing. You make a check. This check might be stopped with the bishop, so there's an attack on the queen, and then the rook is not going to be taken. So you play queen d6, attacking the pawn, and then the rook moves, and you should be able to win that pawn. However, if the rook does move, let's say rook e1, the most accurate way to continue is castle, get out of any trouble. If instead of rook e1, white says, you know what, first I'll give you a check. That's fine. King to f8 is the best move. We like the knight in f6, reaching these potential squares, e4 potentially later on. So this is much better for black. Let's go back a second. So in this position, instead of c4, what about just castle? Okay. Now we have to take here with the queen. Obviously, if you take the knight, you get pinned. And there's also an attack on the bishop. We're going to be able to swap pieces. So let's make it happen. Take, and now rook c1. Looks completely fine for white. I would like to play with this position. Usually, if I didn't know that this was wrong, actually. Knight to b4 and white and black is safe. Rook c7. What's going on here? The rook just reached the 7th rank. Okay, rook b8, defend the pawn, and now That's it. There's nothing. Even though it looks like there's something, there is nothing. Rook f to c1, doubling up. You play king d8 and the rook is trapped. There's nowhere to go for the rook. Here gets taken. Here, then you can play e6. And yeah, the rook, well, it's not really trapped, but you're winning material. The attack is vanishing. Rook c6 cannot go there. Rook c5, but then you play knight e3, making a fork. Rook c3, then knight a2 makes a fork. So that's gonna be it. So back in this position, what about, let's say, bishop a3 attacking the knight? Fine, you play e6. Position is like -3 or something, okay? It's just much better for... There's no compensation for the opponent. What if instead of bishop a3, what if bishop e2? Best move according to the engine. King to d2 attacks the rook. The rook might be doubled up, but then simply knight takes. And whenever this rook moves away, you can take this one. The rook stays around, but then you can attack it again. So you've won another pawn, basically. And we'll have to take the line from here, and I'll just see you in the next episode.